Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions and to create space for all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Monday. We actually have a thought piece scheduled to drop this upcoming Monday, so definitely be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. Now, if it is the case that you're looking for a listening alternative, well, we're available wherever podcasts are playing, and we provided you with access to a few links down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is on agency. I want to have a conversation on agency because I think that it's really important that we recognize what's within our scope of agency and what is outside of it. And I think that oftentimes when it is the case that we grow up in more collaborative and communal settings such as I did, there's a lot of people who feel personally threatened or have an issue with your agency because they want you to do a certain thing a certain way, want you to go a certain place at a certain time, and if you exercising your agency don't align, then that can be its own issue for them. And I think that it's really important that we recognize that where we do have the choice, where the rules are arbitrary and they don't serve a function, that it's important that you give yourself the permission to practice agency. So I want to have this conversation around mental wellness because I think a lot of the times, a lot of the things we find ourselves doing, a lot of the situations we find ourselves pressured in, it is an encroachment on our agency. We feel forced, we feel pressured, we feel obligated to do things that we know we fundamentally aren't really interested in doing. And so I am someone who is a huge proponent of agency. It started very young. It was simple things. I think it's because when you're homeschooled, you're very self-directed in the way that you learn. And I remember just finding it completely ridiculous to ask to go to the washroom when, if it is the case I need to go to the washroom as a child, like I just need to go to the washroom. There's no requesting, there's no permission. I need to exercise my agency and do what it is that I need to do. And I wouldn't ask to go to the washroom. And even when teachers tried to make it like a requirement, I just didn't feel it was their problem or their concern because it was me exercising my agency in response to my body's needs. And while I didn't have the language to articulate it in such a fashion, it was the fundamental rule and the belief that kept me defiant when it was the case that they were trying to kind of establish those kind of parameters. And so now as an adult, I think a lot about agency, especially as it relates to leadership development in children. And I think about, well, how many of us as adults allow others to encroach on our agency unnecessarily? To what extent are we finding ourselves accepting invitations to events that we don't necessarily want to go to? We feel peer pressured into it. And I think that it's really important that you do the pressure test in reverse. I think if people take real issue with you exercising your agency, that gives you a sense as to whether or not those are the kinds of dynamics, relationships that you want to continue to nourish, because you want to be able to have the kinds of relationships where your agency is respected, it is honored, your boundaries are sought out and respected as well. You don't want to find yourselves in relationships where you're constantly finding yourself being challenged. Your agency is being challenged. agency in and of itself is seen as a threat. And if you're someone who's proactive, you're responsive, you want to do things a specific way, you have a plan, you're acting on your plan, and to others that feels threatening, that's not your issue. And I'm a big proponent also as well as taking responsibility for our emotions, our emotional responses, and that includes like our insecurities, our anxieties, and the things that we worry about, when it really isn't the problem of the person who might be the source of it. And I think that when we think about our agency, we need to think about the choices that we are making and the choices that we could potentially make that have an impact on us, impact on our relationships, impact on the settings we find ourselves in, impact on the decisions we find ourselves making. If we're making a decision that's in alignment with ourselves or not, I think all of that really has to do with what our agency, our belief around our agency is rooted in. And I hope that you recognize that your agency is something that you don't need to make apologies for. Like if you want to go in a specific direction and it's not in alignment with where someone else wants to go, and this is you leading your life and and by your terms, and they take issue with that, and that creates friction and it creates issues, you need to ask yourself, well, to what extent am I exercising my agency if I'm holding space for people whose issue is my agency specifically? And so I think that it's really important that we advocate for our agency, that we protect our agency. A lot of this conversation really centers around the conversations that are happening in the States about regaining reproductive rights, and it's just not something you would think that would ever be on a table, on a discussion for societies that we continue to believe to be so progressive, right? And I think the United States has definitely been, I believe, a huge influencing factor even in my upbringing growing up in Canada, because a lot of the pop culture that we would watch would be borrowed from these States, and I just would never think that there would be a phase and stage in my lifetime where agency was on the table, where agency was a thing that we were fighting for, especially when it comes to women's reproductive rights. But I think that it's really important that we all recognize, and that's not just like women and women's issues, but as individuals, where our agencies should exist, and then protect the parameters of that agency, so that we don't ever find ourselves wondering if whether or not the government or an external body or another person has to say on things that are well within our scope of reference, our scope of decision making. When it comes to our body, our choices, our education, our career paths, our friendships, the communities we find ourselves in, our interests, our hobbies, all of these things should be driven by our own individual agency. They should not be driven by the agenda or by the politics or the policies or the values or the beliefs of anyone external to you. And I'm a huge believer of that. I love the collective, but not enough to have my identity, have my individuality, and all of the different ways that it translates sanitized and erased by trying to fit into this collective norm. And I think that norms are just its own form of toxicity that we often don't look at deeply enough. And I think when we have these societal norms, when we see there's these shifts in trying to establish new norms, and in establishing those new norms, what we're seeing is an encroachment on personal agency, then we should take issue, and great issue on that. And I think so much about the ways that people respond to civil rights and to individual rights and to constitutional rights abroad. And I think a little bit about how passive we kind of are in Canada and the States, and how we're trying to be a little bit more reactive and more responsive, but it requires having a full understanding of what's at stake. And I don't know if we all necessarily have a full understanding of what's at stake, but when it comes to agency, to choices, remember that we're the only species that are driven by consciousness by way of decision making and choice. We're not driven strictly by instinct. We have this choice matrix that we don't necessarily need other people to encroach on. And if we're growing, we're learning, we need guidance, of course, but the guidance is training wheels. At some point we need to exercise our agency independently. And so I want to have that conversation here because I've always been an advocate for agency, and I think because I've always recognized that certain rules, certain requests, certain requirements and demands were arbitrary. I didn't need to follow them, I didn't need to exercise them. And in those situations, like when someone was trying to use their authority to dominate or to put me in a position of submission, I just refused. I flat out refused, because I recognized that they were trying to encroach on something that wasn't theirs, which was my agency. And I really hope that for all of you who are coming to face with any sort of resistance or friction because your agency comes into conflict with theirs, that you choose yours, you choose your path, and how they respond, how they feel as a byproduct of that is most certainly not your issue. Consequences be damned. Not in all cases. I mean, obviously use your when we think about agency, we're not talking about being radicalist by any means, but use your common sense, of course. You don't want to put yourself in a negative situation, but you also never want to put yourself in a situation where you're doing things because you're pressured to do them, you're doing things because you feel like other people expect you to do them, even though you yourself fundamentally, if you were exercising your agency without those pressures, you wouldn't be doing it at all. So that's food for thought for you, something that I want to keep on your radar, because this conversation around the states and around this political shift that's taking place is really fundamentally about agency. It's a war against agency, and I hope that all of us see that. I hope all of us have a position on agency, and that our agency is not something that anyone else should ever feel entitled to and entitled to encroach on. So that was a topic of conversation for today, some food for thought for you. As it relates to my stalking situation, no information for you as yet, but as soon as I know, you will know as well. Thank you so much again. And if you want to have conversations around personal mastery, around exercising your agency in the right ways, in healthy and adaptive ways, and I do suggest that you take a look at our website, check out the live events that we host twice a month, and see if any of those pertain to you, areas of development that you would want to drive as you think about the stages and phases that you go through and grow through in this lifetime. So thank you so much again for tuning in. We'll talk to you all very soon.